I got your name on a piece of paper in my pocket. Hey, look at me. This is happening.
Please don't.
Your son's gonna be home any second. Open your mouth.
No. No.
Open your mouth.
It's the middle of the night when Robert McCall makes his way back to his apartment and notices the light burning inside. He draws his weapon and braces for a confrontation, but the second he crosses the threshold, something stops him cold. A familiar scent. It's Susan, his dearest friend and former partner in the field. They settle in over a bowl of soup, catching up the way old friends do, until Susan finally reveals what actually brought her here. It's the anniversary of Vivian's death. Robert thinks back to how his late wife couldn't stand his sense of style when it came to clothes, and the memory pulls a quiet laugh out of him before the grief underneath it settles back in. The reminder that she is simply gone sits heavy between them.
What? I didn't say anything.
When Susan gets up to leave, she apologizes for showing up on a day like this, then offers him something gentle, a suggestion that maybe it is time he went back home. She tells him that for a man who gives so much of himself to people he barely knows, it might finally be time to make his peace with losing Vivian, because that is exactly what Vivian herself would have wanted for him. The following morning, Robert steps outside to find that his neighbor Fatima's garden has been torn apart. She explains that it was local kids who did it, and that they also left graffiti smeared across the building walls. Robert begins preparing to paint over it when his other neighbor Miles walks past and tells him not to bother, that it's someone else's problem.
You're right. I guess anybody could do it, but nobody does, Miles.
Miles ends up everybody complaining because nobody did what anybody could have done or should have done to begin with. Miles then offers to handle the job himself for $350, well below what any painting company would ask. When Robert chuckles at that, Miles tells him there's nothing fancy about it, just a simple dip and roll, and that he is a proper artist studying at Bridgeview Arts. Robert asks why he isn't in school, and Miles admits he doesn't go to regular classes. Robert already has a read on what Miles is actually doing out on these streets selling drugs, and tells him straight that it is short money and that staying in the game takes more brains than people think. Later, when Miles comes back out and sees Robert still at it on the wall, he drops the price all the way down to $250, and that gets Robert's attention. He tells Miles he can only work on the wall after school hours, and Miles agrees to the terms. For Robert, this was never really about fixing a paint job. It was about giving Miles a door to walk through, away from the dead-end money of street life. Across the ocean in Brussels, a man arrives home to a scene that turns his blood to ice. His wife sits at the table, bruised and visibly shaken. Before he can process what he's seeing, a team of mercenaries steps out from the shadows and moves toward them. They shoot his wife without a word, then push the man down into a dining chair. When he demands to know why any of this is happening, one of the men tells him simply that his name is written on a piece of paper, and that is the only reason that counts. Then he forces a piece of meat into the man's mouth. He goes for tribute. The local authorities quickly rule it a double murder-suicide, but because the dead man was a DIA asset, Susan is sent in to investigate. She asks her colleague Dave York to join her in Brussels. When they arrive, she immediately notices a strange residue on the table. Combined with other things that don't add up, it leaves her with the clear sense that she is looking at a professional hit. As the investigation moves forward, Dave informs her that the data retrieved from the dead asset's hard drive has come back with results. Susan says they can go over it on the plane the next morning and heads toward the elevator to go up to her room. But when she pushes open the door, two men are already inside waiting. They come at her with full force, throwing her around the room while demanding to know where their money is. Susan is no longer young and no longer active duty, but she fights back with everything she has, even driving a blade into one of the men's legs. It isn't enough. When they lock the door behind them, what happens next stays hidden from view. Back in Boston, Robert watches Miles work on the wall. Miles decides on his own to design the entire building, extending his work without asking for anything more. Robert is genuinely pleased. Flipping through Miles' sketch pad, Robert discovers the boy has been painting since he was in 3rd grade. When he asks about a recurring figure that appears throughout the drawings, Miles explains that it represents the hand of God, a tribute to his late brother, a boxer who was gunned down on his way back from the gym. The moment hasn't fully settled before Robert receives a phone call from Susan's husband, Brian. The message is brief and devastating. Susan is dead. Robert listens in absolute silence, then gets up and goes back inside. Not long afterward, he is standing at a distance in Washington, watching her memorial service. He cannot be seen because as far as the official record goes, he doesn't exist. Once the crowd has cleared, he approaches Brian, who tells him the Brussels police are pinning it on a robbery gone wrong, even though Susan never wore jewelry except for her wedding ring. Brian also tells him that the DIA is now working alongside Interpol, and has assured everyone that everything possible is being done. But the way he says it makes clear he doesn't believe a word of it. Robert takes possession of Susan's final personal effects and starts his own investigation into her death. As he works to access her encrypted phone, the killers back in Brussels are drinking and off their guard when they are suddenly killed in an explosion carried out by the same people who murdered the DIA asset and his wife. Robert eventually cracks the phone's encryption and forces himself to look through the forensic photographs of Susan's body. When he reviews the elevator footage, he sees something that sends him straight back to Washington. He finds a park bench and waits for Dave York, his former partner from his years with the DIA. Dave recalls the hotel collapse that left everyone believing Robert was dead, and tells him he carried that grief for a long time. Robert tells him he is sorry he didn't let him know sooner that he had survived. Dave offers his condolences about Vivian and asks whether Robert is still spending time at the beach house, and Robert tells him he isn't. He then walks Dave through what the elevator footage revealed. Susan never selected her own floor because the men who were waiting in her room had already pressed the button. They already knew which floor she was on. Robert asks whether the agency has managed to track them down, and Dave tells him they only found fragments after the explosion ripped through the men's apartment, the work of someone cutting off loose ends. From there, Robert pulls out Susan's autopsy report and draws Dave's attention to a stab wound directly beneath her lower third rib. A technique that precise, that specific to close quarters combat, confirms to Robert without any doubt that this was a professional killing, not a robbery gone wrong. Something else went on in that room.
Mac, whatever it is, whatever you need. I'm in. Same mud.
Same blood.
Later on, Robert watches a car full of thugs roll up while Miles is still at work on the wall. Miles gets in without hesitation, leaving the paint job behind him. At the same time, Robert keeps pressing deeper into the double murder-suicide case that Susan had been investigating. Going back through the forensic images from that scene, he mentally rebuilds the room in his mind and determines it was most likely staged to look like a suicide. He calls Dave and lays out what he's found. The DIA asset was right-handed, but the shot that killed his wife came from someone left-handed. Someone else had to be in that room. Dave fills in another piece explaining that the residue Susan noticed was from a latex glove and that 20,000 euros were recovered inside the killer's flat, which suggests those men were being set up from the start. Robert tells him that if this had been an enemy trying to send a message, staging it would have served no purpose. His belief is that Susan had gotten close to identifying the other person in that room, and that is the thread connecting both cases. He tells Dave he will be in touch when he has more to go on. As Robert keeps digging, he realizes Miles still hasn't returned from wherever those men took him. He picks up his gun and drives to a trap house. He takes down the first man he encounters on the way in, then rides the elevator up and removes two more with the kind of cold efficiency that leaves no room for doubt before moving through deeper into the building. Inside the living room, the crew is pushing Miles hard to go after the people responsible for his brother's death, telling him to empty the entire magazine into them that same night. Right as the pressure peaks, Robert steps through the door with two guns leveled at the room and orders everyone to stay seated before telling Miles to walk out with him. When they get outside, Miles shoves Robert's hands away and wants to know if he has any clue where they just came from. Robert asks why. Miles doesn't focus on his drawing and painting instead, and Miles tells him straight that art doesn't pay the bills or put food on his mother's table. Robert presses the gun into his hands and tells him to start right here if he wants to take his first life, reminding him it only takes 5 pounds of pressure on the trigger to do it. When Miles can't pull it, Robert takes the gun back and tells him plainly what that means.
See what happens when you deal with a liar? Huh? I lied to your little punk ass. Tell me, you better give me a right answer to what you see when you look at me. Killer, you don't know.
Oh, no. All right.
Man ain't spelled G-U-N, son. You got a choice. You got talent. You got a chance, and I want to hear about your environment and what your mama didn't give you and the white man won't give you no shot. You got a chance. Use it while you're still alive. You don't know what death is. You have no idea what death is. Make a decision.
Hey, yo, Mr. McCall. Why me?
Why not you?
But why me?
Let's find out together.
Later, while Robert is cooking in his kitchen, Miles appears at the door and lets him know the wall is finished before coming inside for something to drink. He looks around at the kitchen walls and tells Robert that for a plate of that food, he could paint those too for $115. Robert agrees, but only if Miles reads a book he picks out for him. During one of his shifts as a rideshare driver, Robert picks up a passenger who says he needs to get to the airport for his daughter's 5th birthday, but something about the man puts Robert on alert and he quietly starts driving the wrong way. When the passenger doesn't catch on, Robert mentions that they've been heading away from the airport for the past 3 minutes. That's the moment the man pulls out a knife. Robert responds by cranking the wheel hard and pushing down on the gas, using the vehicle's momentum to destabilize the man while fighting him in the tight space of the cab. The man escalates and produces a gun as well, but Robert still manages to overpower and kill him as the car tears through a series of violent swerves. When it's over, Robert takes the man's phone and burns the vehicle, which marks the end of his career as a rideshare driver. Before Susan's death and beyond just driving, Robert had spent his days quietly building a life centered around helping those who had no one else to turn to. On a train headed for Istanbul, dressed as a devout Muslim, he had locked eyes with a small girl before slipping into the bar car behind a Turkish man. He made conversation first, then told the man exactly who he was looking for. A man who had kidnapped his own daughter from her American mother purely as an act of cruelty. When the man warned him that looking for someone like that came with serious risk, Robert said he would at least give him the chance to stop, reconsider, and imagine the absolute worst that could come his way. The man stood up and sent his people to finish it. Robert stayed composed. He started his watch, absorbed the room in a single scan, and took all three men apart with the same unstoppable precision, making use of everything within arm's reach. Then he moved toward the man at the back of the car, clicked the watch off, and spoke to him about two different kinds of pain. Pain that hurts, and pain that changes you permanently. That day, he told him, he got to decide which one it was. Back in Boston, the girl's mother ran into a law firm and pulled her daughter into the kind of embrace that doesn't let go. She was told that even the State Department had no explanation for how the child had found her way home. What they did know was that 45 minutes earlier, someone had brought her downstairs and left. The next day, Robert had a regular passenger, an elderly Holocaust survivor named Samuel, who told him he was his favorite driver because he could always be counted on to arrive precisely on time. Sometimes Robert would sit with him on a bench and listen while Samuel spoke about a sister he had lost long ago. That day, Samuel showed him a portrait of her, Magda, and told Robert what had become of them. He had turned 9 during the Third Reich, and he and his sister had been separated and sent to different camps. He never laid eyes on her again. 60 years later, he saw her portrait go up for auction at $12 million. He had taken the case before a judge and argued that the painting had belonged to his sister, but the court demanded concrete evidence and Samuel believed he had finally found it. After Samuel finished, a staff member from the residence came to walk him back inside and pulled Robert aside to give him some context. He said he had tried to assist Samuel a long time ago. Samuel had been insisting for years that he could prove the painting was rightfully his sister's, but he had never produced anything solid, no records, no bill of sale. Only the same return trip to the same courtroom to hear the same answer. Perhaps, he said, because it gave the old man a reason to keep going. Later, after driving Samuel back from court, Robert listened as he complained that the judge had barely glanced at what he brought in as evidence. Robert suggested that perhaps the painting felt so familiar because it was something genuinely rare. Samuel pulled out the only surviving photograph of Magda and spoke about her again, circling back to the same raw wound. Losing the painting felt to him like losing his sister all over again. After that, Robert continued driving all sorts of people through the city. A young man on his way to his first job interview, a girl who had just gotten into the university she had dreamed about, and among them one passenger whose situation echoed something Robert understood deeply, a man heading out for his first tour in Iraq. Robert told him he would be right here when he came back. He finished another book at home that night, and the next morning he went to the bookstore for a new one. Inside, he spotted the little girl he had brought back from the Turkish man on that train. He gave her a quiet signal to stay silent while her mother found the next title on his list and handed it across the counter. Robert said this would be the last one, and she told him she hoped he would start a new list soon. On his way out, he asked about the for sale sign that had been up, and with a glance at her daughter, the woman told him their plans had changed. He left the store visibly glad to hear it. Later that night, Robert picked up a young woman who was clearly in distress and in physical pain, being accompanied by a man who handed Robert his card at the start of the ride. As the drive went on, Robert took in her torn clothing and her condition and made a decision. He turned away from her address and drove directly to the hospital instead. When he came back to the hotel afterward, 4 young men were waiting, and he informed them that the card had been declined. "Head, let you hang with us because your daddy's a client. You up the first thing." When they handed him a second card, he told them he hadn't taken the girl home at all. He had taken her to the hospital, where they were pumping her stomach at that very moment. When Robert realized they didn't even know her name, he told them that under any other circumstances he might have offered them the chance to do the right thing, but not that night. He demanded every phone, every camera, and anything else they had used to record what they had done to her. One of them moved to lock the door, and the moment he did, Robert read the room, started his watch, and launched the second the first punch came. He slipped it, opened the man's face with the edge of the credit card, and folded his arm back on itself like it was made of nothing. The second one came forward and went down just as quickly, leaving the room with a broken arm and a shattered wrist. The third reached Robert only to have his bones crushed and his neck snapped. crumpling straight to the floor. Then Robert turned toward the next one, invited him forward, and put heavy, relentless strikes into his face without pausing once. 29 seconds total. The last one was already in tears when Robert asked him, right-handed or left-handed? When he said left, Robert ordered him to dial 911 and tell them everything, then added that his father's money was not going to cover this. When it became clear that this one also didn't know the girl's name, Robert told him to give him his left hand. The boy hesitated. Robert took his head and said it again. When he finally complied, Robert told him she had better leave a 5-star rating, then broke his fingers and walked out, leaving him sobbing on the couch. Robert didn't have to wait long before that 5-star rating came in from the one he had left standing. Not long after, he returned to his apartment, and inside he caught the lingering scent of Susan, the friend who was still alive at that moment, though she did not yet know what was coming. Back in the present moment, Dave is home with his family when a knock comes at the door. His wife opens it to find Robert standing on the step. Robert makes no pretense about their history. He is not simply a former colleague. He was the man who ran Dave's life in the field for 7 years. After Dave introduces him to the family, they sit down together and Robert tells him about the man who had tried to kill him the day before. He passes over the man's phone, still, sealed behind military-grade encryption, and explains that the people behind Susan's death are systematically eliminating anyone connected to the Brussels investigation, which puts Dave and his entire family squarely in their crosshairs. He tells him to route the phone through the office, run the numbers, and cross-reference every name against the passenger records in and out of Brussels around the relevant dates, because whoever they are hunting had contact with that device. Dave assures him he will handle it. A brief silence lands between them before Robert pulls out his own phone and dials. He has already broken through the encryption and found his contact in the dead man's phone. He reaches Pedro. When Robert asks what happened, Pedro says simply that Robert died and that it gave him permanent anxiety. It's fine. Take me to jail. I could use the break. Under Robert's steady, unblinking stare, Pedro finally levels with him. 3 months after Robert dropped off the map, the government shut the whole operation down, and Pedro went private shortly after, doing the same things you and I did. Forgotten country, killing names on a piece of paper. Only now there's a price next to them. We killed the enemy. Who said they were the enemy? Not us, not me. We just followed orders. As Robert holds his silence, Dave pushes further, arguing that the distinction between good men and bad men is a fiction. There are only enemies and people like Susan who end up caught in the space between. He admits that his team had no idea the Brussels contract involved a deep cover agency asset, and that Susan had gotten dangerously close to identifying who else had been inside that dining room. She was the only one who could have put all of it together until Robert came back from the dead. That's when the real answer surfaces. Dave is the one who put the fatal knife wound in Susan. He also let slip not long after that every member of Robert's former unit is now involved, including Airy, Resnick, and Kovac. Then he walks Robert outside to a car where the rest of the team is sitting and waiting. Dave tells him none of this is personal. Robert listens, then tells him that the world is filled with men like them. Men who operate under the belief that nothing they do will ever come back around. In a perfect world, he says, every action carries a cost. Most of the time, it doesn't. This time, it will. They made the mistake of killing his closest friend, and that means he is going to hunt down and kill every last one of them. A beat later, Dave's wife comes out of the house to take the children to school. Robert uses that moment to step out of the standoff and ask her for a ride to the station. As he leaves, he makes a point of making deliberate, menacing eye contact with each one of the waiting mercenaries, completely cold. Robert, threatening an entire team with his hand while riding alongside their family, is a level of composure that doesn't belong in a reasonable world. 2 of the mercenaries quickly make their way to Susan's husband's house, but Robert gets there ahead of them and moves Brian out of the line of fire to a motel. There he tells Brian directly that the men coming for him are the same men who killed Susan. Brian wants to know why. Robert gives him the honest answer, stripped of any softening. Brian is a loose end. Later that same night, back at Robert's apartment, Miles has started painting the kitchen walls and phones Robert while he's still out. During the call, Miles hears dogs outside and glances out the window, figuring it must be a delivery driver. It isn't. It's Dave and another member of the team, Kovac, working to break into the apartment. Robert, watching from a distance, tells Miles to go to the bedroom, find the bookshelf, and pull out a book titled Native Son. Dave's team finishes picking the locks and enters the apartment. Miles finds the hidden button and slips inside the concealed room just in time. Once inside, he spots Robert's old Marine uniform and asks what this place is. Robert only tells him to stay calm and stay quiet. Robert listens as the mercenaries sweep carefully through every part of the apartment. When Dave approaches the bookshelf, Robert tells Miles to move farther back. Miles nearly loses his nerve when he notices a glass panel in the wall, but Robert steadies him with the explanation that it's a two-way mirror and that they cannot see him on the other side. The mirror, however, immediately draws Dave's attention. As Miles begins to panic just a few feet away from him, Dave steps up to the glass and draws a sad face across it with his finger. He's just about to fire through it when Robert calls him. Robert dryly points out that since Dave has already made himself at home inside his apartment, he might as well water the plant while he's there. Dave tells him he is making an enormous mistake by going to war with him, but Robert cuts through it and delivers his response with the full weight of someone who has already decided how this ends. "You got it back with Dave. You going to war with me." Afterward, Dave stretches back across the bed, stares up at the ceiling, and sees a framed photograph of a beach mounted above him. The location clicks into place. He knows exactly where Robert is heading. Home. Once the men have cleared out, Miles comes out of the hidden room. But the second he reaches the front door, the mercenaries are right there waiting for him. Somewhere else entirely, Robert arrives at a bridge where he is told the town beyond it is being evacuated ahead of a serious hurricane. He flashes a false badge and gets through anyway. When he reaches the abandoned town, he moves through the empty streets and stops in front of his late wife's bakery. He stands there, taking it in. Behind him, not much later, Dave and the rest of the team cross the same bridge, kill the officer who tells them to turn back, and push on into town. Dave points out the bakery to his men before directing them toward Robert's old house. After clearing it, Dave selects the coastal watchtower as his elevated position and begins scanning the town for Robert from above. He finds him and sends Kovac in to make contact, with Ari held outside as backup. Kovac enters what appears to be a tailor's room and hears a sewing machine running on its own. He moves toward it cautiously, then catches Robert's reflection in a nearby mirror and fires at the glass. But Robert is already out of the frame. He comes through a side angle with a harpoon gun and drives it directly into Kovac's face. Ari hears the shot and comes inside to check on him, finding Kovac exactly like that. Dave orders Ari and Resnick to push toward the ocean. As Ari moves along the shoreline, he spots photographs of Susan covering the entire wall of one of the buildings. He steps closer to look, and Robert materializes behind him with two blades, cutting him down with brutal and absolute precision. Dave demands over the radio to know what is happening. Resnick soon discovers Ari's body and reports back that he is dead, with photographs of Susan covering the walls around him. Meanwhile, Robert is already moving across the street toward his wife's bakery. He spots Dave positioned at the top of the watchtower and fires at an electrical pole to generate cover, then makes his crossing. Dave recognizes him too late and radios Resnick, who has picked up Robert's blood trail and confirmed his position. As Resnick advances, Robert steps inside the bakery and turns the flour in the air to his advantage, all while tracking Dave above him through the watchtower windows as Resnick closes in from below. Dave orders Resnick to go into the bakery. As he moves to obey, Robert steps back out and fires up toward the tower. Resnick hurls a flash grenade into the building, but the flour suspended in the air catches immediately and the explosion throws him backward off his feet. From his elevated position, Dave fails to hit Robert and calls out to Resnick over the radio, only to understand a moment later that Resnick is also down. That is when Robert's voice comes over the radio telling Dave that no one is left now but the two of them. Dave doesn't turn back. Instead, he plays his final card. Miles is bound in the trunk of a car and fighting to break free, and Dave fires into it. He tells Robert he took a calculated risk, that the boy mattered to him.
I'll make it simple. Step out, show yourself, and I won't kill the kid.
With the wind swelling around him, he keeps sending shots into the car, noting that it makes things interesting as he deliberately tears through the side mirror and the taillight. He tells Robert 2 rounds remain, and that the final one is going through the center of the trunk. Miles is losing his composure inside as Dave lines up the last shot. But at the precise moment Dave squeezes the trigger, Robert fires into the rear tire, throwing off Dave's aim just enough to push the shot wide of its mark. As Robert moves toward the base of the watchtower, Dave begins to unravel. He keeps screaming into the storm until a brutal gust of wind knocks him flat, wringing a cry of pain from him as he scrambles back to his feet. Then he shouts at the hurricane around him that Robert couldn't save his wife, couldn't save Susan, and cannot save this boy. The words hang just long enough in the howling air before Robert steps in behind him and drives a punch squarely into his face. Dave pulls out a knife and attacks, but Robert slips every single attempt and drives him hard into the ground. Dave still manages to connect with the blade and draw blood. From that point forward, the fight is raw and total, both men punching, wrestling, and throwing each other across the floor. Dave eventually gets Robert locked into a chokehold, but Robert reaches back and pushes his fingers deep into Dave's eyes. As Dave screams, Robert takes the knife and drives it in again and again before delivering the final blow using the exact same close-quarters technique Dave used to kill Susan. But he doesn't leave him there, where he fell. He tears open the back of Dave's neck, then kicks the body down to the rocky shore and lets the incoming waves take it. I'm a bigger daddy than him. I'm older than him. Although he's a real daddy, he's got kids and I don't. But daddy is a state of mind. You know what I'm saying? I'm your daddy. After standing inside that moment of finally settling what he owed Susan, Robert goes to the car and pulls Miles free from the trunk. The boy has taken a bullet in the leg. Robert carries him into the house and gets him settled in the kitchen. He examines the wound and tells Miles it is not as bad as it looks. The bullet passed clean through. Miles, still visibly shaken, says his mother is absolutely going to hold Robert personally responsible for all of this, but tells him he has his back regardless.
Hey, Mr. McCall. Yeah. Who are you, man?
Robert gives no answer. He moves quietly through the house, pausing at a framed photograph of himself with Vivian, then drifting to the window to look out at the water below. A moment later, Miles comes and stands beside him and tells him the bleeding has stopped. He asks whether this place belongs to Robert, and Robert tells him it does. Then he tells Miles to sit, and together they watch the ocean beat itself against the rocks in silence. Sometime after that, Miles is on a bus when a girl sitting nearby asks what he's drawing. He tells her he's working on a superhero, someone who knows what's coming before anyone else does, who has hidden rooms and locks that can't be broken. She asks if this superhero can fly, and Miles tells her he drives a Malibu instead. She laughs and tells him that's still pretty cool. Back in the neighborhood, Fatima comes home to find the wall completely transformed. Miles has created a vivid mural of people moving through a thriving urban garden. As she stands there absorbing it, she turns and notices another painting on the wall facing it, with the words, "I leave you the best of myself," written beneath it, signed with his mark, the hand of God. Across town at the senior residence, the manager comes to Robert's old friend Samuel with an apology. But rather than simply returning the painting Samuel had fought so long to reclaim, they bring someone else into the room. And the moment she enters, the two of them know one another instantly. It is Magda, his sister, the one he lost during the Holocaust. And they hold each other the way people do when an entire lifetime has passed between them. As it turned out, Robert had asked Susan to help him confirm that Samuel was the rightful heir to the portrait. But what they uncovered went far beyond a painting. They didn't just find the portrait. They found Magda herself, alive, and brought two people back to each other who had been torn apart by history. Out on the beach, Robert stands by himself, pressing his lips to his wedding ring and looking out over the water. And for the first time in what feels like a very long time, with the weight he has carried beginning to ease and the voices of the past no longer dragging at every step he takes, Robert McCall allows himself simply to be still and lets the peace he bled for come to him at last.